Osiris League Season 6 is nearly here, but what does it take to be a truly competitive team in Ark of Osiris game mode? In this video, I'm going to break it down for you, so stick around. What's up everybody, Psych out here with the Rise of Kingdoms video. Osiris League registration opens here in just about 4 hours from the time I'm recording this video. By the time you see this video, it'll already be here. And of course, Ark of Osiris occurs every other Sunday. And every now and then I get questions about, well, what does it take to be a competitive Ark of Osiris team? What do good teams do? How can my Ark of Osiris team get better? What's some general strategy for Ark of Osiris? And in the past, I've sort of been reluctant to say too much about my team's particular strategy. And I won't be doing that in this video. I won't be revealing anything about my Osiris League or Ark of Osiris team's particular strategy. But I'm going to talk about some general tips and things that we can see that top teams do, highly competitive Osiris League and Ark of Osiris teams do, that non-competitive teams don't do. And look, I've been on non-competitive Osiris teams. I've been on very competitive Osiris teams. And I think there's just a big distinction between what those two teams do. And in this video, I'm going to give you some general tips and guidelines. So the first thing I really want to talk about here is a sort of background, I guess, for Ark of Osiris. So look, we had a match this week. I actually wasn't in the squad this week, and I'll explain a little more on that. I actually missed the registration deadline because I was traveling. In any case, our team over here did win this week. But what I want to start with is I'm not going to go over all of the rules for Ark of Osiris. You can read all of those here, but I do want to provide a little bit of background. And it's basically for those of you who are new, but it's basically a capture the flag kind of game. And I have some drawing tools up here. So basically every so often, I think it starts maybe at 10 minutes or 15 minutes into the game, a little flag will appear here where I've placed this blue dot. And well, it's called the Ark, and you will fight in the middle, and you'll try to carry that back to one of your buildings. And teams are on either side. You've got this blue side up here, and I forget what their name is. It doesn't really matter. And then there's the red side down here, and they're fighting against each other, right? So it's just two kingdoms or two alliances really fighting against each other. Every 15 minutes that Ark appears, and you try to carry the Ark back to, well, you have to carry it back to a non-enemy building, which basically means a building that's unoccupied, a building that your side has occupied, or even you can even drop it off in a city on your team. So, and if you take the Ark there, you get some number of points for it. All of that stuff is listed here in the general set of rules under the Osiris rules here. So again, I'm not going to go over all of that. But the other part that works towards scoring points, the other main part that works towards scoring points, is occupation of buildings. There are all these buildings on the map. In fact, maybe I'll just flip through here to show you. So here it mentions the Ark Temple. Here are two shrines of war. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand about the map is that it's mirrored. So teams will talk about, oh, are we top side or are we bottom side? And I've always thought, or are we the left side or the right side? I've always thought that's really silly. You need to have language that you use that makes it really clear which side you're on all the time. And so in our particular, we refer to them as strong side and weak side. Strong side being the right side of whichever way you're facing. Again, because the map is mirrored, it doesn't really matter if you're the blue team or you're the red team, because if you always go to the right side, your structures are the same way. So in this case, the right side that you're going to, or what we call the strong side, always has the Shrine of War on it. So if you're the blue team, it's on your right side. If you're the red team, it's on your right side. So the map is really mirrored in half of this diagonal. I feel like there's a tremendous amount of communication confusion because people will say, oh, we're top side. Well, I'm used to being top, not bottom. I don't know how to do that. It's really about the mirror of the map. That's what you need to understand. It's what you do on your side, whether you're the blue team or the red team. So there's a Shrine of War, and then there's also the Shrine of Life. They give some points, and that's part of the game, is that you try to score points by occupying these buildings. Once you've captured the building, you have to hold it for so long before you start accruing points. The Shrine of War gives some points. The Shrine of Life gives some points, but most importantly, those also give buffs. The Shrine of War gives a pretty important buff because it gives additional attack. to your side. So that's a value. The Shrine of Life actually gives healing speed, which is actually probably not of super value. People will just use healing speed ups if they need them, whether they have the Shrine of Life or not. But if you've occupied that, it will increase your healing speed, and there's a little bit of points for occupying those buildings. These outposts also give a little bit of points, not a ton, but there's 3 on each side, 6 total on the map. And then the buildings that really do give a lot of points are these altars. So there's these desert altars, and then I think there's another one. It's kind of weird that it says Iset Desert Altar, because it's actually not what it's called. It's called the they're both altars, but I forget what the name is. One's a desert altar and one's something else. In any case, these give the most points. These are the ones that you really want to hold on to, that have the most value in terms of occupation, right? Holding on to those have a lot of value. And then of course the obelisks also have some value. Importantly, that's where your team will teleport in. So like, let's say, imagine here that we are I'll go ahead and clear this off. We're the red team here. Once you've captured your obelisk and have occupied it for long enough, your team can teleport their cities up to, I think you get up to 20 teleports per match. You can teleport up there, which makes it a lot closer to the action when the action is going on. So that's really the structures, and you score points again for holding those structures and occupying those structures. You can also score points by collecting resources essentially from these caravans on the map and delivering those back to your city before the match ends. But that's really how the point systems works. Whoever has the most points at the end of the match, which is around 50 minutes in length of actual competition time. There's a little bit of pre-competition time. But at the end of that time period, whoever has the most points is the winner. So that's just a little bit of background. Again, I won't go into all the details on here. There's all kinds of stuff in the rules that you can learn, including about the skills. I'll mention something a little bit about that at the end. But for right now, let's get into what does it really take to differentiate the highly competitive Ark teams from the non-competitive Ark teams. As I mentioned earlier, both sides have up to 30. They can have up to 30 competitors enter on their team. And of course, each competitor or each player can have the standard 5 marches on the field at any given time, which means that each side has 150 marches to deal with. Now, one of the big things that I've seen as a difference between competitive teams and non-competitive teams is having a strategy, having any strategy at all. Many non-competitive teams really don't have a strategy. They just say, some of you go over here, some of you go over there, and that's it. Or just say, hey, let's show up and just go wherever you want. If you want to be competitive in Ark of Osiris, or if you want to be competitive in Osiris League, that strategy is just never really going to cut it. And so you've got 150 marches. That's one way to think about it. And this is the way that highly competitive teams think about it, is I've got 150 marches to deal with. What do I want to have in those marches? Where do I want those marches to be at any given time? And how can I get those marches to be in those places? And so that's really the way the super competitive teams think about it. And I'm not an Ark of Osiris organizer, but I know a number of Ark of Osiris organizers, and that's exactly what they do. They take these 150 marches and they say, okay, this is where we want all of these marches, and this is how we want them to be on the field at any given time during the match. So that's really the first starting point, is figuring out what you want to do with those 150 marches. Now, another key strategy point, or one of the things that makes strategic Ark teams different from non-strategic ones. So you can see, because I mentioned earlier the map is mirrored, some people will say, okay, well, there's this side over here, what we would call the strong side, and there's this side over here, what we would call the weak side. Or again, some, I think, less organized teams would call that top side and bottom side. And that's the way they divide their marches up. They'll say, okay, you guys go top side, you guys go bottom side, and then sort of that's it. Now, the problem with this strategy, or if you want to call it a strategy, is when the Ark appears, it's not really clear who goes there, and sometimes they send everybody there. They overcommit to the middle. They don't have enough presence in the buildings, and they lose all the buildings during the time when they do that, right? So that's a real problem, I think, with that strategy of just dividing people up into top and bottom. And it's sort of a lazy kind of strategy. Anybody can say, okay, well, 15 players go to the top side, 15 players go to the bottom side, and we're just call it even. We're splitting our marches up 75-75. And again, to me, that's not a really effective strategy. Other strategies that teams might use or think of as a strategy is say, okay, well, that's true. We do need to have a top side. We do need to have a bottom side, or again, strong side, weak side. But we also need some marches committed to the middle, and they'll divide people up into those 3 groups. Okay, you're a mid player, you're a bottom side player, you're a top side, or you're a weak side, you're a strong side player. And again, that works okay. That's sort of a beginner level strategy, in my opinion. It's not a very advanced strategy. It won't work well against the very, very top teams who will do things a little bit differently even from that. And that's what I'm about to get into here, is that the really top teams are going to start to look at this map and say, well, you know, we could consider it 3 lanes, but really there's actually 4 lanes. There's this sort of inside lane here. There's this outside lane here. There's an inside lane here, and there's an outside lane there. So what we're looking at here is a strong inside lane and a strong outside lane, and we've got a weak inside lane and a weak outside lane. Weak inside, weak outside, right? So we've got 2 inside lanes, 2 outside lanes, and we're assigning players, we're assigning roles to those lanes. Who's going to manage each of those lanes? Who's going to manage each of those roles? So that's another way to divide up the map that I think is much more effective. And then some teams will also say there's actually a 5th lane. There's also this middle lane here as well. And so that's another way to devise your strategy. If you're thinking about how am I going to strategize, how am I going to divide up the map, this is one way to do it. Again, I'm not going to tell you how many to put, how many marches you should put, or how many marches we typically put in each of these lanes and how we divide up that kind of strategy. But this is what a competitive team will do. They'll look at the map in terms of 5 lanes. They'll recognize that the map is mirrored, and they will assign those 150 marches to different lanes accordingly. So that's one thing to consider if you're trying to be a much more competitive Ark of Osiris team. Another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about Ark of Osiris and building occupation is the value of holding onto those buildings. That means the really competitive teams, the really good teams, have to have good garrisons. And really, because these are the buildings here, let me mark all 6, again, pretending we are the red side in this instance. These 6 buildings, your 2 obelisks, your 2 altars, and your 2 shrines, you really need to have strong garrison captains, right? The really competitive teams have excellent garrison captains in those buildings, and they can hold those buildings. They've got marches nearby to fill them when they get rallied. They've got marches nearby to clear swarmers in the open field. Holding your buildings is really essential because there's a lot of points to be had by holding those buildings, or buffs in the case of the Shrine of War. So having those 6 garrison captains, again, that's the way top teams think about it. Who are my 6 garrison captains? What are those 6 garrison marches? And in many cases, you don't just want one garrison march. You want to have a backup garrison march. You're going to say, okay, you're the primary garrison. When you're in there with your march, you're going to be the garrison captain. But sometimes you have to refresh. Sometimes that march gets low and you can't keep it in as the garrison captain. Or sometimes you lose the building, you lose the structure, that gets knocked out, and you've got a new garrison captain who's ready to step in. So that's the secondary garrison captain. And really competitive teams have those captains identified. They know who's captaining those. They also know who's filling each of these structures. So they might be assigning roles to people like, okay, your job is to always have a march in this structure, or to always have a march in that structure, because again, you've got 150 marches to deal with. Where are you going to put those marches is a really essential part of a highly competitive team strategy, and they're going to know who those garrison captains are. They're going to make sure those garrison captains have the best gear, the best garrison commanders. They're going to make sure they've got the right marches behind them to fill in those structures. And again, that's what really competitive teams do, versus non-competitive teams just go, oh yeah, you have a garrison, you go garrison that, and hope people fill it in. They don't really tell people who's supposed to fill that in. And so you hear on voice chat all the time, need more troops, need fill here, or fill my rally, or whatever. And it's the same thing with rallies, right? So if we look at rallies, you might say, okay, well, this person on this side is the rally leader, and so they're going to rally that structure. And sometimes even non-competitive teams will say this, that these are going to rally those structures up there, but they won't say who's going to fill those rallies and what marches they're going to fill those rallies with. And all of that stuff needs to be mapped out ahead of time so that people know, I need to save a march to fill a rally. I need to save a march to fill garrisons, what those marches are going to be, and how those are going to operate. Again, highly competitive teams know how to do this. Non-competitive teams really don't know what they're doing in terms of assigning players to roles and assigning marches out there. So that's the real big part of having a strategy at all. So many don't have a strategy at all, but a really basic strategy concerns which lanes are we operating in, who's garrisoning those lanes, who's rallying from those lanes, and what are the marches in those lanes that are going to protect those buildings. And at the same time, you also need to know perhaps who's going to fill in here in the middle, who's going to go for the arc when the arc appears, who is responsible for sending marches to the middle, how much are we going to commit to the middle versus holding on to our buildings. And again, you need to know that, because otherwise people will overcommit to the middle, or they won't commit enough to the middle. And it's really essential to have that planned ahead of time. And really competitive teams know who's going to the middle, when they're going there, and which marches aren't going there, which marches are staying back, which marches are going to continue garrisoning those buildings. Okay, so that's really about the sort of overall strategy and understanding the different lanes in Ark of Osiris. And I will say something here. We did play an Ark game this last week. Let me see if I can pull it up here. So this is one that the team that I didn't get to play for won because I wasn't in registration in time. But I do also have up here, I did favorite our battle. And this isn't really I don't know anything about this team that we played, but we didn't really have a strategy this week. This was just one that we just put together. We didn't really have a strategy. We actually didn't have alliance skills, which is something I'm going to talk about here in a minute. Yet we still absolutely crushed this team simply because they had no strategy whatsoever. They spent a tremendous amount of time wasting what their marches were doing. And really effective teams just don't do that. Really effective teams send their marches to places where they're doing something productive. And something productive means holding and occupying buildings or capturing the Ark of Osiris, or in the case of provisioning, actually gathering provisions. You see lots and lots of teams spend their time field fighting, just fighting other marches, trying to get kills on the field. And that's just not what Ark of Osiris is about. That's KVK kind of stuff, but not Ark of Osiris. And in fact, in this particular case of this one, our opponents actually did that a lot. They just did a lot of silly field fighting when what they should have been doing was attacking structures, or they should have been trying to defend structures that we were attacking. And they just gave us the structure and they gave us the points as part of doing that. And so we got a very easy win, even though we didn't really put together a very detailed strategy in this particular match, because our opponents really had just zero strategy whatsoever. So that's the real reason that you need to have some kind of a strategy. You need to understand what lanes people are going to. You need to understand who's doing what in each of those lanes. You need to understand what each of the marches that you have are actually supposed to do. Now, that takes me to a really important part of Ark of Osiris, which is the opening. When things open up, when the map opens, who exactly is doing what? Capturing your obelisks right away is really critical, because the faster you capture those obelisks, right, the faster you capture these obelisks, the faster you can teleport your marches in. And the faster you can teleport your marches in, the faster you can get your troops, more troops on the field faster, more buildings filled, more buildings captured. And getting that opening right, and capturing these buildings here along the way, and capturing these buildings as soon as they open, and capturing these buildings as soon as they open, pressuring the enemy as soon as the match starts is really, really critical. That means you've got to get out of your city right away. You can't have players dawdling around going, oh, geez, which marches should I send out, right? You need to have players with their preset marches, every single one of their marches preset. And as soon as the gates open for the battle, they need to know where those marches are going. You need to send marches to rallies, and many players do this in the opening. They have a rally. Let me go ahead and clear my drawing here. Many effective teams will rally this building, they'll rally this building, they'll rally this building, they'll rally this building. They'll rally those buildings right away. Sometimes I've even seen players rally. They'll say, we're going to rally all these buildings, right? So this is from a red perspective, right? So they've got rallies going all over the place. And why would you rally right out of the gate? And the answer is because rallies march faster. Rallies have march speed buffs. And they tend to march down the field much faster than single individual marches. So that's another thing that top teams do, is they use the rally to get those marches going down the field much, much faster. Now, I mentioned skills earlier, so let me go ahead and pull open a little bit about the skill system. Each alliance is allowed, and I won't talk about all of the skills here, but each alliance is allowed to pick up to 6 skills. Skills cost some points. You earn points as the battle progresses, and then you can use those points to use these skills, and the skills give you some kind of a buff. I will say one thing about hard push right here. Every single top team uses hard push. Like, it's just a must use. This is especially used right at the beginning of a match. Every top team will use this. You push hard pushes. You use this skill as soon as the match starts, because when you occupy those buildings, well, first of all, it increases the march speed of your rally by 50%, right? Which is really, really critical. The second thing, and the most important thing, is that if you occupy a structure, that structure's occupation time goes down by 60 seconds. That means if you hit your obelisk, because that's what you're trying to do, you capture these obelisks, That means the time it takes for you to actually hold the obelisk and start scoring points, but most critically, allow your alliance to teleport up, right? So if we're talking about, you know, everybody's way back here in these starting zones, right? Once you've captured this obelisk and held it for long enough that you actually are starting to score points on it, then you can teleport up, and that's really critical. So hard push is essential for that. Every single competitive team that I've ever seen uses hard push. It is really a must use. Now there's a whole bunch of other ones here that competitive teams use or don't use, and I'm not going to go through all of those, but I will say that for sure hard push is critical, and you're going to want to have that in your Ark of Osiris arsenal if you want to be a competitive team. The last thing I want to say, so that's all I'm really going to say about skills, again, if you want to have a competitive Ark of Osiris team, is which marches to use. I made a video recently where I talked about what I think are the top marches for open field players. I'll put a card to that video up at the top. And many of those marches are really applicable in the open field. I don't know that you would necessarily want to use all of those marches in the open field for Ark of Osiris. I don't know that you necessarily, these are the marches to absolutely use. Two key criteria to keep in mind, and I won't give you a list of all of the marches, but the two key criteria to keep in mind for Ark of Osiris marches are area of effect. Not just area of effect damage. Area of effect damage is important, but also area of effect buffs, area of effect debuffs. All of that kind of stuff is really critical. When we talk about the middle fight in Ark of Osiris, being able to clear the field, being able to debuff your opponents, being able to and generally have buffs on your marches that are better, again, so that you can clear the field faster, is really, really critical because you want to grab that arc. You want to grab the arc, you want to take it back to your building, you want to score those points. And area of effect is really, really critical for that. When you're fighting around buildings, area of effect is also really critical. Debuffs on the building, debuffs on the garrison are really essential when we're talking about swarming buildings in Ark of Osiris. So those are the kind of marches that are really, really critical, having area of effect. And the second factor that is really critical in Ark of Osiris is march speed. You want to have marches that can move down the field. If you are marching in Ark of Osiris, you are not fighting. And so you want to get to the place you need to go as fast as you can. You want to get to the fight as quickly as possible. So marches with march speed are essential. That's why, so if you go back to the list of marches I talked about, I would definitely drop commanders like Leonidas. I would not run a Guan Leo in an Ark of Osiris. Guan is really good. Alex has a lot of march speed. You might consider a march like Guan Alex. You might consider a march like Guan Scipio Prime, again, because they have a lot of march speed. You want to consider Honda Tadakatsu, very good in Ark of Osiris because he has a lot of march speed. I would not be using marches that just do really, really good trades. Attila Takeda is fairly quick because it's a cavalry march, but it's just about trades. It's not about actually clearing the field. I would not use Pakal Herald in Ark of Osiris because, again, it's not about clearing the field. It's about getting good trades. It doesn't do a debuff to the target. It doesn't do a good job of swarming structures. You want to use marches, again, that do lots of area of effect. Trajans are good. Williams are good. Joan of Arcs are good in the early game, right? So even Constantine is probably not the worst in the early game because of the area of effect debuff that he does. So look, or I guess it's a buff for your marches. But anyway, the point here is this: when we're thinking about what marches to use in Ark of Osiris, we want marches that have area of effect, not just damage, but area of effect effects, and also a lot of march speed. Because if you are marching, you're not fighting, you're not taking an objective, you're not getting things done that are important for your team winning the match. So look, I think that's all I'm going to say here about Ark of Osiris and Osiris League. I'm really looking forward to Osiris League coming up. It's always an exciting time. It's always fun to watch the top teams and to do the league bets and bet on who's going to win. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to hopefully participating in that. We'll see how our team does. But hopefully this video gives you some sense of what competitive teams do in terms of strategy, how they think about the field, how they think about setting out their marches, how detailed they get into what their marches do compared to non-competitive teams that just sort of show up and play every week. And if you want to be one of those competitive teams, those are the things you're going to have to start doing. I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.